Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named American Horror Story, Season 9, 1984. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The drama begins in 1970 when the people at a summer camp were massacred overnight, and the killer even took one ear from each victim. The scene of this tragic crime was known as Camp Redwood. Fast forward 14 years to 1984, after finishing an aerobics class, two girls, Montana and Brooke, with nothing better to do, struck up a naked conversation in the bathroom. They got acquainted just like that. As they were leaving, they happened to run into three guys who were discussing a recent murder case. The handsome boy, Xavier, mentioned that he was going out of town for a few months because he'd found a job as a counselor at a summer camp, and he invited everyone to join since the camp was short-staffed. Everyone was keen on the experience, except for Brooke, who seemed visibly anxious. That very night, Brooke had a close encounter with a serial killer known as the Night Stalker, whose name was Richard Ramirez, a historical figure who was eventually caught by the police. He was known to leave a pentagram symbol at the scene of his crimes, leading some to say he was a killer sent by the devil. Just as Richard was about to kill Brooke, a neighbor heard the commotion and came to her rescue. Richard cursed that he would find her eventually, and Satan would lead the way, then fled the scene. The next day, Brooke joined the ranks of those heading to the summer camp. Everyone was excitedly driving there when halfway through, they hit someone by accident. There was a sudden silence, but fortunately the person they hit was not fatally injured. When asked who he was, he couldn't remember, suggesting he might have a concussion. Xavier pointed out that the man's wounds were old and said they had got to keep their stories straight. It wasn't them who hit him. Soon the group arrived at the summer camp, which turned out to be Redwood Camp, the very place where the murders happened 14 years earlier. The camp's owner had the injured man taken to the infirmary. The camp nurse, Rita, after a brief checkup, reported that there was nothing to worry about, just a bit of dehydration. Besides a nurse, the camp naturally also had a chef, a woman who was also a member of the old Redwood camp from 1970. The camp owner revealed that she too was from Redwood Camp of 1970 and had plans to revive the place. It became clear that not everyone had perished in the massacre of that year. During the evening campfire, Nurse Rita mentioned that the killer back then was known as Mr. Jingles because he had a set of keys on him and a limp that made the keys jingle as he walked. He was a former soldier and quite formidable. He killed 10 people, each victim losing an ear, a brutal signature. That's when the camp owner corrected that it wasn't 10 victims but 9, as one escaped. It was her. She was the lucky survivor who had decided to reopen Redwood Camp, hoping to turn her darkest memories into ones of joy and light. The atmosphere suddenly grew tense due to the revelation. After a long sleep, the injured man finally woke up, looked in the mirror, and exclaimed where his ear had gone. Brooke came over as the injured man seemed to remember something and urgently told her to run away, warning her that something terrible was about to happen at the camp. Brooke hurriedly shared the warning with everyone. Just then, a man named Trevor entered to flex his big shorts and smelly mustache. Trevor said he was the camp's sports instructor. Montana asked if she had seen him somewhere before. Trevor replied that he was an aerobics instructor and occasionally appeared in movies. She might have seen him flexing his hormone muscles on TV. Montana then recognized him as a big name in the aerobics world. That night, Montana experienced the power of Trevor's powerful tongue massage in the lake, but that scene is cut short by the director. The scene shifts to a psychiatric hospital where chaos erupts because a significant inmate has escaped. Rewind to a short time earlier, this inmate had pretended to hang himself but instead strangled the guard who came to check on him. He is known as Mr. Jingles, the Jingle Jangle Killer. The facility's director visits the killer's cell and there discovers news about the reopening of Redwood Camp. It seems Mr. Jingles is heading to Redwood Camp. Meanwhile, the two friends, Ray and Clancy, are joking around until Clancy throws a pop can, accidentally slicing Ray's hand. Brooke then gets iodine ready to disinfect the cut in the infirmary, where she shockingly finds the injured man nailed to the door and spots someone with a hood outside the window. Brooke runs back to the lounge at top speed and relays what she saw. Several of the men grab sticks and go out, but they find nothing behind the door, not even bloodstains. They begin to suspect that Brooke is suffering from delusions, and even she starts to wonder if she's developing a mental illness. In the woods, a figure suddenly appears. It's the Night Stalker, Richard. It seems the place is now on the radar of many notorious killers. That night, Brooke tells Montana about the events of the previous summer. She was in the middle of her wedding ceremony when the groom suddenly accused her of cheating with his groomsmen, claiming he saw the groomsmen enter her house and not leave all night. The groomsmen insisted they were just friends and that he slept on the couch, but the groom shot the groomsmen dead, killed Brooke's father, and then turned the gun on himself. Montana suggests that the infidelity must have angered him, but Brooke insists she was faithful and only wanted the groomsmen's company because she was scared of getting married. Before bedtime, the men go to take showers, but the handsome Xavier sneaks off into the woods and is abducted into a car. It turns out the man is an adult film director who had forced Xavier to act in his films and is now threatening to kill him if he doesn't continue. Xavier tells him that he knows he's been followed and offers to introduce him to someone even more exceptional, someone with more gorgeous muscles than him. He brings the director next to the bathhouse, and through a small hole, the peeping director sees something that gets him incredibly excited. Xavier slips away while the director is distracted, and soon after, someone fatally stabs the adult film director. Meanwhile, Brooke was strolling on the dock when a corpse floated by her feet. Startled, she quickly ran away, only to hear Richard's mocking laughter behind her, saying he could find her. However, instead of killing Brooke, Richard was hit by a stick she swung at him. As he stumbled away, he was knocked over by someone who suddenly appeared. It was the injured man. Without a word, Richard killed the injured man, but then, just a few steps later, he encountered another one. Confused, Richard couldn't believe his eyes and chose to kill the injured man once more. Searching the body, he found a camp counselor's badge. It turns out that the injured man was one of the counselors from 1970, and his inability to die suggested he was now a ghost, indicating that Redwood camp was haunted by ghosts, as well as notorious killers. Richard then confronted the camp owner, declaring himself a disciple of Satan and demanding answers or threatening death. He asked why the injured counselor couldn't die, to which the camp owner replied it was because the place was haunted. All the people in the photo had been dead for 14 years. The camp owner, recognizing Richard was the notorious Night Stalker, pleaded with him to stop killing, citing that there had been far too much bloodshed already. Others also discovered the dead adult film director at the entrance of the bathhouse, and with Brooke's vivid description, they realized the killer was indeed among them. So, they all got into a vehicle, ready to make an escape from this haunting place, when suddenly another person appeared, forcing Xavier to swerve and crash the car. The newcomer was Nurse Rita, who claimed she heard something from Mr. Jingles in the infirmary, implying the Jingle killer had returned. The group was skeptical, joking if this was like two serial killers starring in a Daniel C.C. horror movie. Rita mentioned he had a car that could fit 5 people, while Trevor claimed he had a motorcycle that could seat 2, but the keys for both were in the room. After a brief discussion, they decided to split up to retrieve the keys and then regroup. The camera cuts to another scene where, as expected, the camp owner finds the camp counselor in the woods. Their recognition of each other is notably unemotional. The counselor finally remembers that he was killed on the road by Mr. Jingles. Although he hadn't seen the killer's face, he heard the distinctive jingling sound. Meanwhile, Brooke's group of 4 didn't find the car keys in the infirmary. At the same time, Montana and her group managed to easily locate the motorcycle keys. Concurrently, both groups heard someone pounding on the doors. Brooke's group was confronted by Richard, who broke down the door. Except for Ray, the others scattered and ran without a trace. Ray suffered several slashes from Richard until Clancy couldn't stand by any longer and rushed in to rescue him. On the other side, the pounding stopped abruptly. Trevor peeked out like a peeping Tom, only to find the person gone. The 3 of them were just feeling lucky about their narrow escape when someone threw a bag of flammable material inside. Trevor quickly stamped it out, only to realize something was off. It was a bag of feces. Laughter erupted from outside, and upon investigating, the trio discovered several guys pretending to be Mr. Jingles, with the bag of feces being the collection of one of them from half a month. Trevor was in shock, asking what the guy had been eating, amazed that the feces could even catch fire. But as they were talking, the real Mr. Jingles appeared, delivering a stab to each of the 2 imposters, cutting off their ears after killing them and sending the trio running fast like a Tesla bike towards the parking lot. The other group of 4 was also running wildly through the woods when 2 screams were heard. Ray and Clancy had fallen into a trap. Mr. Jingles, also in the woods, came across someone impersonating him, but showing a rare act of mercy did not kill him, perhaps because the impersonation was convincing. In the trap, Clancy unfortunately got a shoulder impaled by spikes and couldn't get up, leaving Ray helpless to assist. Brooke and Nurse Rita waited at the parking lot for a long time with no one else showing up. Suddenly, Rita injected Brooke with a strong sedative, causing her to collapse. It seems like this Rita is quite problematic indeed. Time rewinds to 1 week prior. Nurse Rita approached the facility doctor, expressing a desire to meet Mr. Jingles. Her expertise was in criminal psychology, and she wanted to study the motives behind a serial killer's actions. The doctor agreed, and so Nurse Rita had a meeting with Mr. Jingles. She said she believes that killing isn't his true intention, but rather something has twisted his mind. Mr. Jingles responded that he had always wanted to figure this out himself, and what she would suggest he should do. Nurse Rita proposed he needed to break out of prison first. She needed to study him in a natural environment. Then, she produced a newspaper announcing the reopening of the Redwood camp. Mr. Jingles protested that he couldn't go back there. If he did, he would start killing again. Nurse Rita reassured him that he could kill if he must. Sometimes science requires sacrifice. So it turns out the escape plan for Mr. Jingles was all Nurse Rita's doing. Meanwhile, Nurse Rita had knocked out the real Redwood camp nurse and took her place. The scene shifts back to the present. Trapped, Ray saw Clancy faint and began to talk to himself, recounting an incident that happened to him last year. At a party, encouraged by Ray, a fellow student drank too much and accidentally fell down the stairs to his death. Fearing he'd be held responsible, Ray planned to make it look like an accidental death. But just as he was about to push the car into a ravine to stage the accident, the student sprang back to life. He hadn't been dead after all. However, the car was beyond control and the student ended up truly dying. The incident escalated from an accidental death to premeditated murder, leaving Ray in total shock. Afterward, Ray never recovered from the incident and eventually dropped out of school. Just as he finished his story, Clancy told him this isn't his fault. Ray was surprised why Clancy was not unconscious, claiming that he knew all his secrets now. With that, Ray decided to abandon Clancy and flee on his own. Meanwhile, as the trio was trying to avoid Mr. Jingles, they accidentally stumbled upon the real nurse who had been hidden away by Rita. However, the real nurse, unable to tell friend from foe, broke free from Xavier and ran out, only to be met with a gruesome fate at the hands of the killer. It was an ugly sight, with a stick impaled from mouth to rear. After Mr. Jingles left, the trio inspected the name tag and realized that this was the real camp nurse all along, prompting them to wonder who the hell Nurse Rita was. The trio then encountered Ray in the woods, who explained what had happened. Trevor told Ray to take Montana and escape on his motorcycle and to call the police from any working phone booth they found. Trevor, along with Xavier, planned to rescue others. While on their way, they found Clancy, who had fallen into a trap. They quickly rescued him, thankful that the wound hadn't hit any major arteries. But the chicken screams during the removal of the spikes also attracted Mr. Jingles, who wondered how come the chicken screams could be louder than his jingle bell and wanted to roast some chicken meat for a meal. Trevor suggested they confront the killer in a fight to the death, but Xavier cursed him, saying that he was just good at shooting adult videos, but that guy was a soldier who could wrestle with real muscles. Trevor, undeterred, charged forward and managed to push Mr. Jingles into a trap. Xavier, impressed, exclaimed he was really awesome, but then Clancy found a mask on the ground, revealing that it was not Mr. Jingles who had been pushed into the trap, but someone impersonating him. At the same time, Ray and Montana arrived at the parking lot and noticed drag marks on the ground. While they were puzzled, Richard appeared. Ray immediately recognized him as their pursuer, and terrified, he abandoned Montana and sped off on his motorcycle. Mid-escape, the real Mr. Jingles emerged, and with a swing of his axe, hit a home run, turning Ray into the Headless Knight. Meanwhile, Montana grabbed Richard and kissed him, then snapped at him that he still hadn't killed Brooke. It seems Montana and Richard knew each other well. It turns out it was she who had been egging Richard on to kill Brooke. In the flashback, Montana was an aerobics instructor, and one day, Richard joined the class. He was a total novice, awkwardly flailing about. Montana couldn't stand it and went over to him, asking him to show a little respect for aerobics. Richard replied he liked this music she was playing. Just then, a chicken boy complained about the awful music and wanted to change it. Montana shot back, asking him to get lost with his chicken body. She then turned up the volume, causing the boy to leave in a huff. After the class, when Montana was changing, she discovered that the chicken boy who had stormed out had been killed and was hanging from the ceiling. Richard confessed that he did it because he didn't like the way he spoke to her. The boy got what he deserved for disrespecting rock music, and Montana asked if he would kill for her. Richard replied yes, as she was now his girlfriend. Montana then told him she wanted to kill someone named Brooke. It turns out the groomsman who was killed by Brooke's fiancé was actually Montana's brother. She believed Brooke was involved in her brother's death, so she sent Richard to kill Brooke, which led to the night Brooke was attacked by Richard. Richard's arrival at the Redwood camp was also for the sole purpose of killing Brooke. Back to the present, Xavier and Trevor brought Clancy to the infirmary for some quick first aid. Xavier suddenly remembered the adult film director's car with the keys still in the ignition. They decided to hide Clancy there and then rescue the camp owner, planning to get out of this cursed place with the camp chef. The camp owner had just discovered a body on the ground when Trevor urged her to run. But the camp owner refused to leave, insisting that many kids would be arriving tomorrow, and with her gun, she could protect them. But Trevor was bewildered by her bravery. Meanwhile, Xavier slipped into the restaurant where the camp chef, oblivious to the outside world, was unaware of everything that had happened. Suddenly, Mr. Jingles arrived to flex his annoying jingle bell. Xavier quickly hid under a table. The chef recognized the jingle killer immediately, as they were old acquaintances. Xavier accidentally dropped his flashlight from under the table, alerting the jingle killer, who knocked Xavier out, stabbed the chef to send her straight to cook for Jesus, and then stuffed Xavier into the oven like a roasted turkey. At the same time, Brooke was locked in the storeroom by Rita. With a strong push, Brooke burst out the door, only to fall into a trap in the forest, getting caught in a large net. Rita appeared, saying she knew she would come this way. It turned out the traps were all her doing, set up for her research. She told Brooke to enjoy her time there, as she was her little lab rat. Simultaneously, the handsome Xavier was no longer looking his best, emitting a distinct barbecue scent. Thankfully, the chef, with her dying breath, saved him, and then Xavier helped the chef to a merciful end with a knife. Montana also stumbled upon Brooke stuck in the trap, but didn't help, pretending to go find assistance instead, and left. The scene switched to the camp owner inside a room, pulling out a cherished wooden bear toy, and memories flooded back. It was a toy Mr. Jingles had carved for her, a token from their times of romance which had been mocked by students. In the eyes of others, they were both seen as monstrous beings. Back to the present, Richard began searching for Brooke by spaying his diabetic blood. Montana approached and asked what he was doing, acting just like a fool. Richard replied he was seeking Satan's guidance to find Brooke. Montana scoffed him to cut the nonsense and said she had already found her. Just as Richard was about to finish off Brooke, the jingle killer coincidentally arrived on the scene. When two killers meet, a battle is inevitable. But Mr. Jingles was an ex-American soldier, and Richard was merely a street thug. They were not evenly matched. Within minutes, Richard was nailed to a tree branch by the jingle killer and met his gruesome demise. At the same time, Brooke seized the opportunity to escape by grabbing a nearby tree. After dealing with Richard, Mr. Jingles encountered the camp owner, and memories began to flood back. It turns out that he was inexplicably arrested by the police and subsequently subjected to various electric shocks. He admitted that although he had forgotten the events, the evidence pointed to him as the murderer. The camp owner said it looks like he had really forgotten and let her refresh his memory. She said that night, Mr. Jingles didn't kill anyone. It was all her doing. She put the ears of those people, including her own, at his place, so he was actually framed by her. Hearing this, Mr. Jingles accused the camp owner of being the real murderer, deceiving everyone into believing he was the culprit. Because of that, he was committed to a mental institution and constantly tortured until he believed he was the murderer. He accused her of forcing him to become a monster. He then prepared to kill the camp owner, but the camp owner quickly shot Mr. Jingles several times, knocking him down. It seems that the camp owner is the real tough figure here. Trevor heard the gunshots and rushed over, praising her bravery for terminating the serial killer. Then, the camp owner turned and killed Trevor with a knife. When she turned around, he saw that Mr. Jingles hadn't died and had escaped. In the forest, Richard began to levitate, a sight that Rita witnessed, leaving her utterly dumbfounded, not expecting that Richard could come back to life in this way, not as a ghost, but truly resurrected. Upon seeing Rita, Richard said that Satan had saved him and that he knew Rita's father was a serial killer. Rita was stunned, asking how he could know that. Richard replied that Satan knows everything. It turns out Rita's father was indeed a serial killer who, after being accidentally discovered by Rita during a murder, chose to commit suicide. That's why Rita decided to study serial killers as her research subject. The rest of the group finally came together. The camp owner mentioned that she saw someone camping across the lake last night and suggested that they seek help. Clancy agreed, thinking it was a good idea, and he chose to go with her. And so, the two set off. Suddenly, Brooke saw Ray outside the window. Going out to check, it was indeed him. Ray hadn't realized he was dead yet, mentioning his head felt fuzzy. He speculated that he fell from the motorcycle and then he couldn't remember anything. The camp owner and Clancy rowed the Tesla boat with a paddle but not battery, finally reaching the opposite shore, which was pitch black. Clancy remarked that it didn't look like anyone was there. The camp owner agreed, saying there was indeed no one around, which made it easier for him to kill Clancy. And with that, she killed Clancy and dumped the body into the lake. Brooke and Ray hid away and began sharing their secrets with each other. As they talked, the two of them fell into a secret. Meanwhile, Rita burst in, confessing that it was she who had freed Mr. Jingles, and that everything that happened that night was her fault. Xavier was taken aback and vowed to punish her for what she had done. With that, Xavier chased after Rita's ass. 2 minutes later, as expected, Brooke felt thirsty and went to the fridge to grab a drink, only to find a severed head inside. Ray looked and recognized it was indeed his own head, wondering how it ended up in the fridge. Brooke, terrified, asked if she had just had sex with a lust ghost and ran off in fear. Back in the dormitory, Brooke animatedly started to recount a ghost story, but Montana slapped Brooke from sharing the scary ghost story, knocking her out cold. When Brooke awoke, Montana finally confessed her conspiracy with Richard to kill her and then attempted to strangle her. At the crucial moment, Brooke felt a stick on the ground and jabbed it into Montana's leg, saying when she was planning to kill someone, she had to clean up the stuff on the floor. Taking the chance, Brooke escaped. Meanwhile, Rita and Mr. Jingles came face to face. Mr. Jingles remarked regretfully that it was a mistake for her to release him, as he had never killed anyone before. Knowing the truth, Mr. Jingles decided to stop killing, bandaged himself up, and left. However, he encountered the camp owner on the way and decided to eliminate this menace by executing her. At that moment, Xavier appeared with a bow and shot at Mr. Jingles many times, shouting that he wanted him dead as he roasted him like a turkey. As Mr. Jingles seemed to pass away, Xavier quickly tried to wake the camp owner. The camp owner awoke and stabbed Xavier to death before Xavier could react. After a while, Mr. Jingles suddenly opened his eyes. It turned out Richard had used Satan's power to resurrect him. The next day, a school bus arrived, carrying a group of happy and lively kids coming to play. However, the events at the Redwood camp were far from playful. Brooke and Montana fought until dawn, wrestling their muscles intensively. To cut to the chase, Brooke stabbed Montana to death. This scene was unfortunately witnessed by everyone on the school bus. Brooke was subsequently arrested by the police. The camp owner stabbed herself in the leg, crying out for help like a giant baby. She also accused Brooke of being the murderer responsible for all the deaths. Ray stumbled out as well, and upon seeing him, a medical staff rushed over to check his blood pressure and pulse, only to find that he had neither. The medical staff, realizing something was wrong, hurriedly called for an ambulance. However, as the ambulance left the Redwood camp, Ray fell out. It seemed that as a ghost, he couldn't leave the campground. Everyone who died there had become ghosts. Richard, having formed an alliance with Mr. Jingles, drove away. Over time, Richard continued his killing spree, which Mr. Jingles could no longer stand, declaring he had reformed and would not assist in any more killings. But Richard wouldn't let him go, and one day, Mr. Jingles reported him. Richard was chased down like a dog by the people for miles and was eventually captured and imprisoned. Fast forward 5 years. One day, a photography enthusiast visited the now-abandoned Redwood camp and was killed by Ghost Montana. The ghosts, unable to leave, resorted to killing for entertainment. On the other side, the camp owner became famous overnight due to the events from 5 years prior, began purchasing haunted houses, and turned them into tourist attractions. Over the years, she became a real estate tycoon. Trevor was even coerced into marrying her, but in reality, there was no love between them. Their union was purely a business arrangement. Meanwhile, Brooke, having exhausted all appeals to no avail, was found guilty and faced execution within a few days. Trevor handed the camp owner a newspaper pointing out a recent murder case at the Redwood camp. It was the one committed by Montana. The camp owner remarked that the camp was still her property and suggested they could reignite interest in it once more. The scene shifts to Mr. Jingles, who had completely turned his life around, and surprisingly, was now married with a son. His work was going smoothly, and overall, his life was incredibly fulfilling and happy. The camp owner held a press conference at the Redwood camp, announcing its grand reopening in a few days, along with performances by several all-star bands. In the forest, Ghost Clancy was ready to rush in with a knife, but Montana held him back, saying that he should wait and there will be a time for revenge, but it's not now. In prison, the Night Stalker Richard saw the news about the reopening of the Redwood camp and that the camp owner had even invited his favorite band. Back in his cell, Richard began to summon the power of Satan. He managed to bewitch a guard to open his cell and set him free. On another note, Brooke was executed by lethal injection. In another turn of events, Mr. Jingles came home to find his wife had been murdered. Fortunately, his son was unharmed, but there was a note left in the crib stating that Satan would have his revenge, a clear sign Richard was responsible. The back of the note featured the article about the Redwood camp reopening. Mr. Jingles had hoped to stay out of it, but now he saw no choice. He sent his son to be raised by his aunt, saying that he thought he could be free and live a good life. But freedom eludes him. Darkness will forever follow him. He asked his sister-in-law to tell his son when he grows up that he loved him very much. The sister-in-law asked where he was going and why he would leave if he loved his son. But Mr. Jingles just replied, to protect him and to end all this. Back in the prison, Brooke took a deep breath and came back to life. It turned out Rita had secretly switched the drugs. Now the question arises, why did Rita revive Brooke? And how will Mr. Jingles seek his revenge on Richard? The scene shifts back to in the year 1948, when Redwood Camp went by a different name. As it shows, a young Mr. Jingles lived there with his mother and little brother. Mr. Jingles and his mother worked part-time at the campground. His younger brother was named Bobby. For various reasons, the mother was particularly fond of Bobby and didn't care much for Mr. Jingles, even harboring some dislike towards him. One day, Mr. Jingles saw the lifeguard and a woman heading towards the woods and warned his brother not to go swimming until he returned. However, Bobby, disobeying the instruction, snuck into the water for a swim. That's when the tragedy struck. Bobby was caught in the propeller of a kayak and was killed. The mother was instantly devastated and swore that everyone present would pay for her loss. Fast forward to 1989, we pick up the story just after Brooke is secretly rescued by Rita. She shows Brooke a newspaper article about the reopening of Redwood Camp. Brooke declares she has only one thought, to kill the camp owner, who falsely accused her and put her in prison. Rita then takes Brooke for a nostalgic trip to an old-fashioned roller skating rink from the 80s. There, they meet a man with a big mustache, who is actually the imposter of the serial killer Richard. The imposter overhears them talking about Redwood Camp and asks for a ride. The two agree, but on the way, the imposter starts telling scary stories, which angers Brooke, and they make him get out of the car midway. Just then, a traffic cop approaches to check their IDs, but the imposter shoots the cop dead, revealing he's not a good person at all. Brooke and Rita speed away, escaping this dangerous stranger. Meanwhile, Mr. Jingles had arrived at Redwood Camp, and to his surprise, he encountered the fat man who had impersonated him 5 years earlier. The man was still in his fat and hadn't changed a bit, still wearing his rain poncho. Mr. Jingles asked what was going on, and the man replied that he was already dead as a piece of greasy soap. As they spoke, two others pounced on Mr. Jingles from behind, pinning him down with a knife to his throat, ready to kill him. The fat man intervened, adding that their master Montana said no killing before the opening of Redwood Camp. So they tied Mr. Jingles up in front of everyone. Mr. Jingles warned them to be careful of the night stalker Richard, who was on his way there. Montana scoffed that they were all dead and feared for nothing, and they planned to kill everyone attending the opening ceremony. Mr. Jingles was stunned, asking why they wanted to kill so many people. Montana explained that death was preferable to continue existing in this forsaken place, and that the news of a massacre at the music festival would attract supernatural detectives and exorcists from all over the world to come and drive them away, allowing them to truly die. Clancy added that they weren't the only ones in the forest. He had encountered a mad woman in white who chased him like a dog, scaring him to death. Mr. Jingles revealed that the woman was his mother and that there had been a major campsite murder in 1948. The story continued with the aftermath of Bobby's death. One night, the mother killed everyone in the camp and was prepared to kill her son, Mr. Jingles, who was left crippled after she stabbed him in the leg in self-defense. Mr. Jingles had no choice but to kill his mother in self-defense. Perhaps it was the mother's anger, pain, and blood that haunted the place. Now Xavier took Mr. Jingles to his mother's dwelling but refused to go any further. Mr. Jingles indeed found his mother inside. The mother lamented that she searched for Bobby every day but could never find him. One day she felt a pang in her heart, but it turned out to be Mr. Jingles, not Bobby, possibly referring to a moment in 1970. The murder case from that year was also incited by the mother, which means she was the real culprit behind the 1970 murders. Mr. Jingles asked why, and his mother confessed her hatred for him, resenting that it was Bobby who died that day, not him. Mr. Jingles revealed that his son was now the only person he cared about, and that he intended to kill Richard. By the way, he named his son Bobby as well, indicating that, despite everything, Mr. Jingles still cared about his mother and brother. The camera pans to a new scene where the imposter unexpectedly catches up with Brooke and forces her to drive away with Rita in tow. However, Brooke shifts into reverse, and once again, the imposter is overpowered by the two individuals. In the forest, Trevor unexpectedly spots Montana and chases after her. Indeed, it's Montana, and in an instant, sparks of romance ignite between them. Meanwhile, the Richard imposter is being tortured to death by the two assailants, his fingertips gruesomely chopped off. On the other side, Richard arrives at Redwood camp and begins a killing spree. A group of artists who arrived early are slaughtered to near extinction. Mr. Jingle's mother, now a ghost, mentions that Richard possesses demonic strength, able to resurrect continuously. She questions how a mere mortal could stand against him and suggests that dying and becoming a ghost might be a better strategy to fight him. Upon hearing this, Mr. Jingles considers it a viable option. The mother, with tears, shows that she still harbors feelings for her son, Mr. Jingles. Accepting this, Mr. Jingles ends his life, deciding to fight Richard as a powerful ghost. The Richard imposter is on the brink of death when a passerby happens upon him and saves him. However, the imposter knocks the Good Samaritan unconscious and stuffs her heavy body in the trunk of her own car, then drives determinedly towards Redwood camp. The camp owner, upon seeing a car full of corpses, remains eerily calm and insists that the opening ceremony must go on, urging a quick cleanup. In the forest, Richard is reveling in his own world when the ghostly Mr. Jingles charges at him and a fight ensues. At that moment, the Richard imposter drives in, sending Mr. Jingles flying into a ravine. After getting out of the car, the imposter recognizes his idol, Richard, and reveals he's always been an imitator but never surpassed him. The two then decide to team up to finish off Mr. Jingles for good. Richard prepares to start his blood tracking again, but it seems futile. Suddenly, Xavier appears, claiming he knows where Mr. Jingles is, and leads them to Mr. Jingles' body. Richard is taken aback, unsure of what to do next when Mr. Jingles suddenly reappears and stabs Xavier to death. The imposter is confused, questioning how Mr. Jingles could still stand there after dying, if he is now a ghost, to which Mr. Jingles confirms. The imposter, feeling out of his depth, decides to leave them to fight, saying goodbye. Just as the fight begins, Mr. Jingles is killed again by the camp owner, who then suggests the two Richards join her, as she's in dire need of assassins. In the forest, Trevor suggests to Montana that she should kill him so that he can be with her forever. Montana refuses, claiming she doesn't deserve happiness and never wants to see him again, telling him to leave. Dejected, Trevor walks away. Mr. Jingles comes back to life and hears the voice of his younger brother, Bobby. To his surprise, it really is Bobby, who is there with their mother. Mr. Jingles laments that he hasn't yet killed Richard and worries about what will happen to his son. The mother reassures him that they have found his brother, thanks to him, and reminds him that they are a family. Bobby also invites Mr. Jingles to stay with them, and so Mr. Jingles chooses to stay with his family. Fast forward 30 years to 2019, and Redwood Camp has long been abandoned. A young man named Bobby, who is indeed the grown son of Mr. Jingles, arrives at the site. He soon encounters Montana, who asks about the object he's holding and whether she can have it. After Bobby introduces himself, Montana embraces him. Following a tour of various places with Montana, Bobby pulls out a photo and remarks on the resemblance between Montana and the woman in the picture. Montana is taken aback, recognizing herself in the photo. Bobby is confused, asking if she wasn't dead. Just as Montana is about to explain, Trevor steps forward, appearing to have been dead for some time. Bobby explains that his aunt told him many stories about his father, Mr. Jingles, and he came here to find him. He also mentions that someone has been sending him checks, which could very well be from his father. Montana insists it couldn't be Mr. Jingles, as his father is dead, and so are they. Bobby, thinking this is all a joke, is startled when Montana finds a gun in his bag and urges him to shoot her. Bobby refuses, saying he's not crazy, but Montana forces his hand, resulting in her death. Trevor then prompts Bobby to kill him next. Trevor finds a knife in Bobby's bag and ends his own life. Suddenly, the two of them walk back in from outside, and the bodies in the room disappear. This convinces Bobby that they indeed are ghosts. Trevor then shared his story from the 1989 opening ceremony. Just under an hour before it began, no one had arrived. It turned out that Trevor had intercepted all the attendees at the gate with a bus and sent them back home for various reasons. The camp owner drove up, confronting Trevor about his intentions. Trevor declared that today was his day of redemption, and he wouldn't let the camp owner continue her evil ways. Without further ado, the camp owner pulled out a gun and fired 2 shots, then remarked that if he died outside the Redwood camp, he couldn't become a ghost, and he would never see his beloved Montana again. With another shot, she hit right in Trevor's smelly part and then left triumphantly. Montana was in agony but couldn't get past the forbidden border to help, only able to watch Trevor die. Just then, Brooke appeared and carried Trevor back into the Redwood camp, allowing Trevor and Montana to be reunited forever. Since then, this couple began to rid the people of evil. Trevor slashed the Richard imposter's neck and kicked him out of the campground's boundaries to prevent him from becoming a ghost, while Montana lured Richard into the storage room, where a group of ghosts attacked and subdued him. Bobby asked why they didn't ensure Richard died outside the campground to prevent him from becoming a ghost. But Montana explained that Richard would revive, so it was necessary to keep a constant watch over him. For 30 years, they took turns, always ready to kill the Night Stalker again as soon as he came back to life. This was why Bobby had been safe all these years. After hearing the story, Bobby was incredibly grateful and spent the whole night talking with them. He then asked about his father, wondering if Mr. Jingles had died there and become a ghost. Montana said they hadn't seen him since, implying that Mr. Jingles had disappeared. Bobby insisted on not leaving until he saw his father. In another room, Clancy and the chef were keeping an eye on Richard, and even started to flirt after holding out for 30 years. Suddenly, Richard revived again, and this time he was unstoppable. After killing both, he approached Bobby. Montana urgently told Bobby to leave. Just a few steps away from escape, Richard caught him. However, the group of ghosts arrived in time and chopped Richard into mincemeat. Montana advised Bobby to seek the head psychiatrist at a mental hospital for answers. Bobby managed to flee and eventually arrived at the hospital, where the head psychiatrist turned out to be Rita. Upon learning that Bobby was Mr. Jingles' son, Rita continued the story from after 1989. Brooke found the camp owner and stabbed her in the stomach, but at the same time, the camp owner shot her in the stomach. The result was Brooke's death and the camp owner's torment and demise at the hands of the ghosts. When Bobby asked if it was always Rita who sent him the checks, Rita denied it. They investigated the sender's address on the checks and found that it was actually Brooke, who hadn't died but had assumed a new identity, married, and had children. But Rita was incredulous, having watched Brooke die in the past. Brooke then recounted what happened next, revealing that it was Ray who entered the room, revived her, and helped her escape from the Redwood camp. Bobby asked why she had been sending him money. Brooke replied that it was indeed for him, but also for herself. After learning everything, Bobby resolutely returned to the Redwood camp where he encountered the camp owner. The camp owner claimed to know his father's whereabouts and told Bobby to follow her. However, her real intention was to kill Bobby. At that critical moment, Mr. Jingles appeared to flex his jingle bell and killed the camp owner, leading to a touching reunion between father and son. As they were talking, the camp owner came back to life and ambushed Mr. Jingles from behind. Just as Bobby seemed unable to escape, his grandmother appeared and struck down the camp owner again. When all the ghosts appeared, the grandmother ordered them to finish the camp owner off. Montana told Bobby to leave the place and never return, but to never forget them. By sharing their ghost stories with the children, they would live on, and the spirit of the 1980s would never die. With that, Bobby left the Redwood camp and thus concludes this season. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.